The opinions expressed in this presentation represent the presenter's view about CDK, serverless, and AWS products for informational purposes. The content in any way should not be treated as an official endorsement of AWS technologies by Liberty Mutual and does not reflect the views of Liberty Mutual. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking about how we scale CDK using the Software Accelerator. First, my name is Rajesh Poraiyan. I am the founder of few things. The first one is called the Digital Native Architecture, and the second one is called the Software Accelerator. We will be talking about both of them in our cloud serverless first journey. And with me, I have Mark McCann, Greg Bomkamp, and Nick Manuel. I'll have Mark introduce himself. Mark?
Thanks, Rajesh. I'm Mark McCann, Senior Architect at Liberty, and I've worked with Rajesh for many years, building enabling capabilities to help our teams succeed.
All right, let's start our cloud journey. We started our journey sometime in 2016, and here is how our architecture looked like. Pretty familiar to most of you, right? We had web applications with supporting APIs, interacting with both stateful and stateless business services. Some of them were long-running business processes talking to our domain services and data services, and finally to our humongous database, right? As usual, we had multiple tiers and layers within them, and they were too tightly coupled. And as you can see, a simple database change will ripple through all the layers and tiers, and eventually we have to have a long scheduled coordinated release and a significant governance process, right? So things became very slow. It was really challenging to roll out any new features, right? And when things went wrong, you had to basically roll back one by one, right? And it was tedious. We definitely needed to change. So we kind of started with a question, what if we start up as a brand new organization, right? Like a startup, and know that we are going to be like a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 100 company, right? What would our future architecture be, right? So with that question in mind, we also thought about, okay, if we are starting up as brand new, who is the future consumer? What's their behavior that we are targeting? And we defined our future consumer as someone who is called digital native, right? They are always connected, and they are very good at abandoning traditional channels, and pretty much they are the disruptors, right? For example, they abandoned Blockbuster and they went with Netflix. They abandoned travel agents and they went with Priceline. So the list continued with Uber and Airbnb and so on, right? So what if they abandon our traditional channels? So what do? So we wanted to basically make sure we are wherever they are, and we felt like it's important to expose all of our business capabilities as consumable APIs so that we can expose them. We can be wherever they are, whether it's mint.com or zillow.com or any other .com, right? So with that in mind, we came up with an execution strategy. Of course, we want to be like a startup, and we want to be in the cloud native, and we want to make sure we follow API first strategy and eventually build everything as a service so that someday we can monetize, right? So when you look at cloud native, of course, we have 12-factor apps, microservices, elastically scalable, fault tolerant, And when you look at API first, you really want to be like standards based, consumable, discoverable, open API and so on. And from a culture perspective, you want empowered self-service teams so they can deliver features at will, right? So with that, we came up with an architecture, model with domain-driven design at the core, so we can break down our monolithic into manageable, functional, bounded context, with each bounded context owning their own microservices and APIs. And we wanted to make sure they are event-driven right from the beginning, so we can, react to things. We can, do real-time stream analytics and so on. So the quest to build that wonderful microservice architecture started, you start with 12-factor app, and then you realize that you want to have everything as code. Configuration is code, infrastructure is code, pipeline as code, and you want zero downtime deployment, right? And and then your microservices, they come and go, and you want to be able to kind of discover them at runtime. So they need to be able to register somewhere so you can discover them, right? So you want service registry and discovery, and when things go wrong, you want to be able to, trace them, distributed tracing, and you want observability, and, when things go wrong, you want fault tolerance using circuit breaker, right? You name it, right? So here is that list. By the time you Google and click link after link, read one by one and spend many nights and weekends, you realize that building distributed microservices is really complex, right? And it's very time consuming learning experience. So we wanted to make sure our community doesn't feel that way. We wanted to make it easier in such a way that everything is packaged for them, right? So we created blueprints in such a way that you answer few questions and you get a brand new bounded context. We called it as honeycomb, with everything needed for you: a gateway, a registry, and distributed tracing and configuration, and all you need to do is just build your microservice and deploy to it, right? So everything was happening in minutes. And here is the catalog that we stood up back then in 2017, and things were going fine, right? Definitely changed the way we deliver our software, and but are we better off, right? Maintainability, we were still doing a lot of heavy lifting on cluster management, container orchestration. Many of the open source projects that we used became inactive, and community involvement, we were too opinionated, right? We gave a good start, but the community was not jumping to extend beyond what we were offering, right? They did not really add any new blueprints, and innovation, the ability to innovate was still slow, right? So it was, we were good, but there were some lessons, right? So what we did, we took a step back again, right? As usual, technology landscape changed, and we wanted to evolve with it, right? And the question here is, how do we go from good to great, right? So we did three things. The first thing, I wrote a couple of 6 pages following the AWS model, and then I socialized it with everyone at all levels, right? And a couple of messages. We need to be like a serverless first software factory. That was the key message. And then the third thing, I pull over Mark. We define our North Star, and Mark says, hey Rajesh, we need to do serverless and we need to do CDK, and I deep dive into those things, and it's fully convinced with where we want to go. And we assembled our team very quickly, and then we wanted to make sure it's community driven from day one, right? And so we launched our software accelerator program with a mission to empower our teams with self-service tools, patterns, and best practices to deliver world-class solutions towards our serverless first vision. So if you have an idea, you should be able to create a working software, and if you're proud of it, you should be able to create a pattern out of it, publish it, so that the next team can just get it instantly and then iterate on it, create a new enhancement or a new pattern out of it. So it's like the flywheel effect, right? And our goal was to make sure experimentation is key. Enable the experimentation so that they can innovate, and then eventually the pace of innovation will accelerate, and that will lead to transformation, right? So that was the belief. And this all happened during 2019. We launched our accelerator by November 2019. And I'll have Mark continue on our North Star, our serverless first, vision, and then we will hand it over to our team to demo the product. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rajesh. We crafted our North Star as a serverless first company focused on delivering rapid business value. But in Liberty, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, building on the amazing work of many teams across Liberty from 2014 through to today. Our journey has put in place the enabling building blocks and guardrails for success, and establishing that rapid, secure pathway to production aligned with our enterprise standards and controls. So when we crafted our serverless first North Star, we knew we had the right environment in place to make our North Star a reality. And as we started to get adoption, see the successes and challenges of our teams, we had a great feedback loop in place to constantly improve and evolve our ecosystem. And this feedback from our teams really helped shape the evolution of the North Star to be now a well-architected serverless first company. With our serverless first North Star established, we needed a way to articulate what that meant and how it affects decision making in the enterprise. So in 2019, we came up with the compute order of preference that helped teams ask the questions about using Lambda first, then falling back to other managed AWS services, then falling back to containers, onto PaaS, and eventually onto an on-premises solution. With the continued evolution of change of AWS managed services, this order would be different today, as more and more use cases are handled by managed services: API Gateway, Step Functions, AppSync, S3, DynamoDB, EventBridge, and the list goes on. So we would use those managed services first and fall back to Lambda to glue those services and capabilities together, and then fall back to containers and the other options as I listed above if necessary. So how does CDK factor into this? Well, as Rajesh mentioned, we noticed CDK early, and armed with the lessons from our previous experiences, we saw the massive potential CDK had to enable and empower our teams, while lowering their cognitive burden of getting productive in the cloud. And as Matt Coulter has documented in his CDK patterns journey, creating serverless CDK patterns as an open source capability, it really showed us what was possible within the enterprise. And one of our goals for the Software Accelerator was to shrink the gap between what is possible in AWS and what we could do within our enterprise. So we worked really hard to remove impediments to adoption internally, and we worked very closely with AWS to ensure that any new features and capabilities that were released were aligned with our enterprise standards so that we could embrace them and get them into the hands of our developers really rapidly. Codifying these well-architected serverless first engineering excellence patterns that are easily discovered, extended, and enhanced really has been a game changer for our teams. And supporting the community to create and contribute their own patterns to the accelerator helps keep that flywheel of evolution turning. And all of this has helped ensure our teams focus on delivering business value rapidly and not on undifferentiated work.
Thanks, Mark. So Software Accelerator is a community-driven platform to facilitate the sharing and reuse of different software patterns throughout Liberty Mutual. It's built from the ground up to enable an entirely self-service model for pattern providers to create and share new patterns with Liberty Mutual's engineering community. While Software Accelerator's primary purpose is to jumpstart engineers to allow them to focus on delivering business value from day one, it also helps Liberty Mutual with building and scaling consistency, promoting best practices, and accelerating innovation throughout the company using a variety of different tools and frameworks, including AWS CDK. Software Accelerator strives to have all internal capabilities generated automatically. This includes things like source code repositories, the actual application code itself, and CI/CD pipelines with deployment environments. On top of all that, it'll even automatically deploy the generated code for you. All of these options that I've mentioned can be customized by the user's inputs in the application. Now that we know a little bit more about what Software Accelerator does, I'll hand it over to Nick to show Software Accelerator in action from an engineer's perspective.
Awesome, thanks Greg. So like Greg mentioned, I'm going to walk through how we envisioned engineers interacting with Software Accelerator. So I'll call out some of the key features and I'll also demo generating a CDK app using one of our pattern offerings. So we'll start here on our homepage. There are a few different paths we can take from here. So we've got a link here that will take us to documentation on how to contribute a pattern to our platform. But for today, we're going to focus on generating a project. So I'm just going to click on create here, and that's going to take us to our pattern catalog. So each item here in the list is what we call a generator. So a generator is just a microservice that has logic defined in it to spin up a project based on a corresponding software pattern. Like we mentioned earlier, a big part of our platform is community contributions and sharing knowledge. So you can see here we also list the owner of each generator. And for us, this is just a good call out of not only who's contributing to our platform, but also who maintains and supports each of these generators. So as we scroll through here, you can see we have quite a few offerings. Most of these today are deploying infrastructure to AWS using CDK, but there are a few in here that are more of the Java API-based patterns as well. So we also have a generator here called Build Your Own Generator, and that does pretty much what it says. So it creates a generator in a pattern offering, and it helps you contribute it back to our platform. So this was just our way of making sure that the community contribution process was as easy as it can be, and that it wasn't a limiting factor for our community. So let's go ahead and find a CDK pattern that we can generate from. So I'm going to jump over to our featured page. So this is a page that we added recently so that we'd have a place to showcase new patterns that have been added. So right now we're featuring CDK patterns because we're in the process of onboarding the patterns from cdkpatterns.com. So we've got about 15 of them over here so far, and we did have to tweak them slightly just to fit in with kind of our platform and some Liberty standards, but for the most part we've left them unchanged. So these have been an awesome addition to our pattern offerings, and they've been really easy to onboard for us. So let's take a look at the accelerator in action. So I'll choose simple web service here. So when I click on this, it's going to open what we call the technology preview. So this is just a dialog that provides more information about what this pattern creates. So we get a quick description here. We also get a diagram, so I can see that this pattern is going to create an API gateway that fronts a Lambda function that interacts with DynamoDB. We then have a section for badges. So this particular pattern is AWS well architected, so we're calling that out here. We then have a section on technology, so we're calling out the technologies that are used in this pattern here again, as well as providing links to more documentation on each of those technologies. And then finally, we have a section where we can provide additional links for documentation on this pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue, and that's going to take us to the generator page for this pattern. Cool, so here we are on the generator page. So each generator is going to ask a series of questions that helps us to customize the patterns code and the CI/CD pipeline. So I'll walk through filling out these prompts. We'll start here with the project name. Then I have the option to create a CI/CD pipeline. So if I say no here, we're just going to end up generating a zip file with the pattern code in it. And as you can see, when I switch this to no, most of the prompts go away. So a lot of the answers that I'm giving here, we're just using to configure the CI/CD pipeline. So I'm going to switch that back to yes. The next two prompts here are specific to our CI/CD pipelines at Liberty, so I'll fill those in. Then I'll pick the AWS account and region that I want to deploy to. And then finally, I'm going to specify an environment classification. So, and the last prompt here is just asking for my email address. So I'll put that in and I'll click finish. So the accelerator generator is now going to customize the pattern based on my input, as well as create my code repository and build and deploy pipeline. And once all that's created, my build and deploy are going to kick off automatically. So that should take just a couple minutes to finish. So while that's running, let's take a look at some of the minor changes that we had to make to this pattern. So I'm going to start here in the stack configuration. So here we have an example of an accelerator token. So this is just our syntax for specifying variables that we want to replace throughout the pattern. So this one here corresponds to that first prompt that I filled in for my project name. So the value that I put in there is going to be replaced with the input that I put in during my generation. The other thing that I want to call out for a change here is the stack. So we've created a Liberty specific stack here, but we've also left the original one behind for our developers to reference. So if we open the Liberty specific stack and look at what we did to it, the major change here is that we're extending a base stack from a library that we created called SWA CDK core. And Greg's going to go into more depth on what exactly this library does. But in this case, we're extending this base stack because it's applying some Liberty Mutual tagging standards to the stack. So it's really a convenience thing for us that we don't have to go in here and add those after the fact. So our project should be finished generating now. Let's go check on it. Cool, so our project is generated. Now we've got some links to our code as well as our build and deploy pipeline. I'm gonna go ahead and jump right to the deploy logs using that link. And we're gonna go ahead and grab the API gateway URL that was output in the logs there and invoke it a few times. So this will populate some data in our Dynamo table. So I'll copy this out and let's paste it into a new tab. I'm going to hit this with a path of test. So it looks like that worked. And then I'll try Nick as well. Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to open up the AWS console and take a look at my Dynamo table. So we can see in our table here now I've got an entry for test and Nick with one occurrence in each of them. So let's hit this again and watch that number increase. Okay, awesome. It looks like that's working. So this has really demonstrated the power of the accelerator and what we were looking to accomplish when we originally created it. So as you can see, in just a few minutes, we were able to create a functional project and deploy it to AWS and test it out and see that it was working. And on top of that, these CDK patterns are going to be a huge win for our developer community. They've been super easy for us to onboard, and they're allowing us to increase our number of pattern offerings really quickly. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand things back to Greg, and Greg is going to talk more about our CDK core library and how we're using it with these patterns.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick. So one of the things that Nick and I had done previously was maintain a standard set of CloudFormation templates to help our organization deploy different AWS resources into the cloud. We spent a lot of time maintaining that library, and there were still a lot of issues with things like tracking changes and helping users pick up those changes and pull them back into their own repos. So as soon as we began testing out CDK as a replacement for CloudFormation, we immediately saw the benefits of CDK over CloudFormation. We also saw the power of creating these reusable constructs in code rather than YAML to help keep our maintenance times low. So with that in mind, we started the library SWA CDK core to start holding some of those components that we found we were using across pretty much all of our stacks. These components include things like reusable constructs, different custom resources that we use across the company, and other default props to help adhere to Liberty compliance rules so that our resources don't go through remediation. This library really helps with remotely pushing out changes so that users can pull them in, and also maintaining these compliance rules in a centralized spot. Our team heavily values the AWS CDK documentation. So with that in mind, we try to do as little abstraction in the library as possible so that our engineers can still receive the benefits of the library, but also reference AWS documentation when they run into issues. And similar to everything else, we built SWA CDK core with the intention that the community would do lots of contributing to it so that we can try to incorporate many use cases from across the company and not just the use cases that are directly in front of us. And we publish the library to Pippy for Python and NPM for TypeScript and JavaScript users. So in order to accomplish that, we're using the awesome package from the AWS team, JSII. And this was really, really simple with Matt Coulter's help to get it set up. It was really, really simple for us to get added. And it's a awesome, awesome tool. So now engineers within Liberty are able to take advantage of Python and TypeScript or JavaScript. Now I'm going to highlight a few of the core components that we provide in SWA CDK Core. One of the big core components in SWA CDK Core is the base stack. So if we open up the stack folder, we can see the LM base stack here, and Nick had showed this in his demo previously. Inside here, we have a base stack, which extends the core CDK construct of stack, and we add in a few props that extend the original CDK construct props. And this is really coming back to us saying that we wanted to adhere to what AWS provides. So anything that you can pass into a stack originally, you can also pass into an LM base stack, but we do provide a couple of inputs that are specific to Liberty that are the tags that we apply to the stack. These next two pieces that I'm going to highlight are contributions from one of the engineers within Liberty, Grady Barrett. So he contributed an aspect that applies different managed policies to roles that are created in your stack. So what you do with this is it's an aspect. So when you apply this aspect to your stack, any instances of a role that are created will automatically add managed policies. And this is another one of those pieces that helps with Liberty's internal compliance. Next, this was also a contribution from Grady. So Grady's contribution allows us to manage our version of SWA CDK Core separately from the AWS CDK versions. So previously what we'd been doing is we would update our dependencies every time AWS CDK release a new version, which as we all have seen, they work on the package a lot. So they frequently put out new versions. And that became a big chore for us because when you're releasing, 3 or 4 versions a day, we have to continue to push out those new versions. So Grady's contribution basically moved all of those dependencies over to peer dependencies, and it allows us to manage a version of SWA CDK Core separately as the users will manage the versions of AWS CDK in their own package JSON. So this was a huge, huge time saver for our team and was definitely the biggest contribution that we've had so far to the library. And that about concludes everything that we wanted to show today for SWA CDK Core. I'll just reiterate that CDK has been an absolute game changer for us in the way that we deploy AWS resources. Going from managing CloudFormation templates and passing those around to other users within the company, it was a real big chore. So being able to now switch to these libraries where we can use JSII to compile to different languages and basically push updates out through new versions, it's been absolutely incredible. So thank you all very much for taking the time to see Nick and my demo, and I will hand it back over to Rajesh.
Thank you, Greg. And Thank you everyone for listening to us for the past 30 minutes. We hope this presentation gave a good perspective on how you can accelerate your community as well, right? Have a great day and feel free to reach us at any time. Thank you. Bye.